Mrs. Smith, after thorough review, the board has voted unanimously to deny your parole. The deaths of your sons and the lies you spread will not be overlooked. You remain incarcerated.
I am so sorry for what I did. I know nothing can bring them back, but I wish I could undo it.
The conference room was sterile and cold. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. 7 members of the South Carolina Parole Board sat at a long table, their faces impassive, their notepads filled with decades of documentation. On the wall-mounted monitor before them, a face flickered into view. Susan Vaughn Smith. Prison-issued gray jumpsuit. No makeup. No jewelry. Just the woman who, 30 years earlier, had become the most hated mother in America. For 3 decades, Susan Smith had been rehearsing for this moment. 30 years of appeals. 30 years of letters to the parole board. 30 years of therapy sessions, prison jobs, and manufactured remorse. 30 years of telling anyone who would listen that she had changed, that she was sorry, that she deserved a second chance. But in that sterile conference room on November 20th, 2024, none of that mattered. Because sitting just outside the hearing room, waiting for his turn to speak, was David Smith. And he had come to make sure Susan Smith never saw freedom again. Cut 2. Susan Smith on the video monitor. Her hands are clasped in her lap. She takes a deep breath. She begins to read from a prepared statement. Susan Smith via video link, voice trembling. Members of the board, I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for what I did. I know that no words can ever undo the pain I caused. I know that I took the lives of my 2 beautiful sons, Michael and Alexander. I live with that guilt every single day. Her voice cracked. She paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue someone had handed her off camera. The parole board members watched in silence. Some took notes. Others simply stared. Susan Smith continuing. I was not in my right mind that night. I was suffering from severe depression. I had been sexually abused by my stepfather for years. My father committed suicide when I was just 7 years old. I felt like my entire life was falling apart. I made a terrible, terrible decision. And I have spent every day since then wishing I could take it back. She looked directly into the camera, as if making eye contact with each board member individually. Susan Smith. I have worked hard in prison. I have taken responsibility. I have completed every program offered to me: anger management, parenting classes, grief counseling. I have a job in the prison. I help other inmates. I am not the same person I was 30 years ago. I am asking you, begging you to give me a second chance, to let me spend the rest of my life honoring Michael and Alexander's memory. Please. She folded her hands and bowed her head, waiting. Silence. The parole board members exchange glances. One leans forward. 1. Parole board member, #1. Mrs. Smith, you say you've taken responsibility, but during your time in prison, you've had multiple disciplinary infractions. Can you explain those? Susan Smith, caught off guard. Yes. I made some mistakes. I had relationships with prison guards that I shouldn't have had. I used my phone privileges inappropriately. But I've learned from those mistakes. I've grown. Parole board member, #2. You say you're a different person now. But just 2 years ago, you were disciplined for communicating with a documentary filmmaker about profiting from your story. Is that correct? Susan Smith, flustered. That was a misunderstanding. I wasn't trying to profit. I just wanted to tell my side of the story. Parole board member, #2. Your side of the story? Mrs. Smith, your sons don't have a side of the story. Because they're dead. Beat. But. Susan Smith's face crumples. She says nothing. Parole board chairwoman. Mrs. Smith, we're going to take a short recess. When we return, we will hear from the victim's family. The video feed cuts to black. Cut 2. Hallway outside the hearing room. David Smith sits on a bench, staring at the floor. He is 54 years old now. His hair is gray at the temples. His hands are calloused from years of working construction. But his eyes are the eyes of a man who has lived with unbearable pain for 3 decades. A reporter approaches him, microphone in hand. Reporter: Mr. Smith, what do you want to say to the parole board today? David Smith, quietly, but firmly. I want them to remember my sons. Michael was 3 years old. Alex was 14 months old. They never got a chance to grow up. They never got to go to school, play sports, fall in love, have families of their own. Susan took all of that from them. And she did it for the most selfish reason imaginable, because they were in her way. Reporter: Do you think she's changed? David Smith: I don't care if she's changed. I don't care if she's sorry. I care that my boys are dead. And I care that she gets to wake up every morning, eat breakfast, talk to people, see the sky. My boys never got that chance. Why should she? He stands, brushing off his pants. A bailiff gestures toward the hearing room door. Bailiff: Mr. Smith, they're ready for you. David takes a deep breath. He walks into the room. Cut 2. Inside the hearing room. The parole board sits at their table. Susan Smith's face is back on the video monitor, watching. David Smith takes a seat at a small table facing the board. A microphone is positioned in front of him. Parole board chairwoman: Mr. Smith, you may proceed with your victim impact statement. David looks down at the piece of paper in his hands. It's crumpled, worn from being folded and unfolded dozens of times. He clears his throat. David Smith, reading, voice steady but filled with emotion. My name is David Smith. I am the father of Michael Daniel Smith and Alexander Tyler Smith. 30 years ago, their mother, my ex-wife, Susan Smith, murdered them. She strapped them into their car seats, drove to John D. Long Lake, and let the car roll into the water. She stood on the shore and watched as they drowned. He pauses, swallowing hard. David Smith, continuing. For 9 days, she lied to the entire world. She said a black man had carjacked her and taken my boys. She cried on national television. She begged for their safe return. And the whole time, she knew they were dead. At the bottom of that lake, still in their car seats. His voice cracks. He looks up at the parole board. David Smith. Michael was 3 years old. His favorite toy was a red fire truck. He loved Sesame Street. He called me Daddy. Alex was just a baby. He was learning to walk. His first word was Dada. They were my entire world. And Susan took them from me. He glances at the video monitor where Susan Smith is watching, tears streaming down her face. David Smith, voice rising. She says she's sorry. But sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't undo what she did. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that she lied, manipulated, and blamed an innocent black man to cover up her crime. She didn't just kill my boys. She weaponized race. She put an entire community under suspicion. She is a manipulator, a liar, and a murderer. He takes a shaky breath. David Smith. 30 years is not enough. It will never be enough. I'm asking you, begging you to keep her in prison, where she belongs. My boys never got a second chance. Why should she? He folds his paper and sits back, his jaw clenched. Silence. The parole board chairwoman nods. Parole board chairwoman. Thank you, Mr. Smith. We will now deliberate. 30 minutes later, the parole board reconvenes. Susan Smith's face reappears on the monitor. She is pale, her hands gripping the edges of the table in front of her. Mrs. Smith, this board has carefully reviewed your case. We have considered your institutional record, your conduct in prison, the nature of your crime, and the testimony of the victim's family. After deliberation, this board has voted unanimously to deny your request for parole. You will be eligible to reapply for parole in 2 years, in November 2026. This hearing is adjourned. Susan Smith's face crumples. She covers her mouth with both hands. Her shoulders shake with sobs. The video feed cuts to black. Outside the parole board building. David Smith, stands in front of a cluster of news cameras. He is calm, but his eyes are wet. David Smith, to reporters. Justice was served today. Susan Smith will remain in prison. And I will be back here in 2 years. And in 2 years after that. And in every 2 years for the rest of my life if I have to. Because my boys can't speak for themselves. So I will speak for them. A reporter shouts a question. Mr. Smith, do you think she'll ever be released? David Smith, not if I have anything to say about it. He turns and walks away, leaving the cameras behind. Susan Smith cried for 9 days on national television. But she never cried for her sons. She cried for herself. October 25, 1994, Tarde. Union, South Carolina. The night was cool and dark. The roads around Union, South Carolina were quiet, lined with pine trees and the occasional porch light. This was a town of 10,000 people, where everyone knew everyone, where crime was rare and trust was common. But on the night of October 25, 1994, that trust would be shattered. Union County, 911, Dispatch Center. 9:12 p.m. The phone rings. Dispatcher Shirley McLeod picks up. 911 dispatcher. 911, what's your emergency? Susan Smith, hysterical, screaming. He's got my kids. He's got my babies. 911 dispatcher. Ma'am, slow down. Who has your kids? What happened? Susan Smith, sobbing. A black man. He took my car. My boys Michael and Alex, they're in the back seat. Oh my God, oh my God. Please, find them. 911 dispatcher. Ma'am, I need you to calm down and tell me exactly what happened. Where are you? Susan Smith. What? I'm at Monarch Mill Road and Highway 49. He had a gun. He made me get out. He took my car with my babies inside. 911 dispatcher. Okay, ma'am. Stay on the line. I'm dispatching units to your location right now. Radio chatter. All units respond to Monarch Mill and Highway 49. Carjacking in progress. 2 children involved. Within 3 minutes, Deputy Sheriff Steve Morrow arrived on scene. He found Susan Smith standing on the side of the road, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking. She was wearing jeans and a sweater. Her face was streaked with tears. She looked terrified. Deputy Morrow, approaching, flashlight in hand. Ma'am, I'm Deputy Morrow. Can you tell me what happened? Susan Smith, voice trembling. I was stopped at the red light. And this man, he just came up to my window. He had a gun. He told me to get out of the car. I begged him not to take my babies, but he pushed me out and drove away. Deputy Morrow. Can you describe him? Susan Smith. He was black. Maybe in his 30s or 40s. He was wearing a dark knit cap and a dark jacket. I didn't see his face very well. It was dark. Deputy Morrow. What kind of car were you driving? Susan Smith. A burgundy Mazda Protégé. 1990. Dar. My boys are in the back seat. Michael is 3 Dar. Alex is only 14 months old. Please, you have to find them. Deputy Morrow, into his radio. Dispatch, we have a carjacking. Vehicle is a burgundy, 1990 Mazda Protégé. 2 children in the back seat. Suspect is a black male, 30s, 40s, dark clothing, knit cap, pedai. Armed with a handgun. All units be on the lookout. Sheriff Howard Wells, at home, 9:25 p.m. His phone rings. He answers. Sheriff Wells. This is Sheriff Wells. Dispatcher. Sheriff, we have a situation. A woman says she was carjacked at Monarch Mill Road. 2 young children were in the back seat. The suspect drove off with them. Sheriff Wells, sitting up in bed. I'm on my way. He hung up the phone, grabbed his badge and gun, and rushed to the scene. Sheriff Howard Wells had been in law enforcement for over 20 years. He had worked everything from traffic stops to domestic violence calls to drug busts. But this, a carjacking with children involved, was something he had never dealt with before. When he arrived at Monarch Mill Road, he found Susan Smith sitting in the back of a patrol car, wrapped in a blanket. She was still crying. Deputy Morrow briefed him on the situation. Deputy Morrow. "Sheriff, she says she was stopped at the light here when a black male approached her vehicle, forced her out at gunpoint, and drove off with her 2 sons still in the car." Sheriff Wells. "And she's sure it was this intersection?" Deputy Morrow. "That's what she said." Sheriff Wells looked at the stoplight. He walked over to the intersection and stood there, watching. The light turned red. He waited. After about 10 seconds, the light turned green again. He frowned. Sheriff Wells to himself. "That doesn't make sense." He walked back to the patrol car and opened the door. Sheriff Wells to Susan Smith. "Mrs. Smith, I'm Sheriff Howard Wells. I need you to walk me through exactly what happened. Start from the beginning." Susan Smith, still crying. "I was driving home from my friend's house in Pauline. I had Michael and Alex in the back seat. I was going to stop at my mom's house to drop them off. But when I got to the red light here, this man, he came up to my window. He had a gun. He told me to get out. I begged him not to take my babies. But he pushed me out of the car and drove away." Sheriff Wells. "And you're sure it was at this light?" Susan Smith. "Yes." Sheriff Wells. "Did you see which direction he went?" Susan Smith. "He went that way, toward Highway 49. Sheriff Wells, nodding. Okay. We're going to do everything we can to find your boys. I promise you that." But even as he said it, something didn't feel right. Union County Sheriff's Office. Midnight. .4. Sheriff Wells sits at his desk, reviewing Susan Smith's statement. He picks up the phone and calls his chief investigator. "Sheriff Wells, I need you to pull the traffic camera footage from Monarch Mill Road. I want to see if we can spot the carjacking on camera." Investigator. "Sheriff, there are no traffic cameras at that intersection." Sheriff Wells. "What about nearby businesses?" Investigator. "There's a gas station about a quarter-mile down. I'll check if they have surveillance." Sheriff Wells. Do it. And I want roadblocks set up on every highway out of Union County. If that car is still on the road, I want it found." October 26, 1994, Tarta. Day 1 of the search. Helicopters circle overhead. Bloodhounds comb the woods. Diverse search nearby lakes and rivers. FBI agents arrive to assist. News crews set up camp outside the sheriff's office. CNN anchor. October 26, 1994, morning broadcast. The search continues this morning for 2 young boys, 3-year-old Michael Smith and 14-month-old Alexander Smith, who were reportedly taken during a carjacking last night in Union, South Carolina. Authorities are looking for a black male suspect, described as being in his mid-30s to early 40s, wearing a dark knit cap. If you have any information, please call the Union County Sheriff's Office immediately. The story went national almost immediately. Within 24 hours, Susan Smith's face was on every major news network. Her tearful pleas for the safe return of her sons were broadcast to millions of viewers. The image of a grieving mother begging for her children's lives resonated deeply with the American public. But in Union, South Carolina, Sheriff Howard Wells was becoming increasingly skeptical. October 27, 1994. Tartar. Day 2. Susan and David Smith, press conference. Union County Courthouse steps. 2:00 p.m. Susan Smith stood at a podium, flanked by her estranged husband David and her mother Linda Russell. Behind them stood Sheriff Wells, FBI agents, and local officials. In front of them, a sea of cameras and microphone. Susan wore a pink sweater. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes were red and swollen. She clutched a tissue in one hand and gripped the podium with the other. Susan Smith reading from a prepared statement, voice shaking. "To whoever has my children, please bring them home safely. They are innocent babies. Michael is only 3 years old. He loves Sesame Street and playing with his fire truck. Alex is just 14 months old. He's learning to walk. They need their mommy and daddy. Please don't hurt them. I am begging you, please bring them home. She broke down, sobbing. David Smith put his arm around her, though his own face was pale and expressionless. He stepped up to the microphone. David Smith, press conference, October 27, 1994. Susan and I are going through the worst nightmare. Any parent can imagine. Our boys are out there somewhere. We just want them home. If anyone has seen them, if anyone has any information, please call the police, please. The press conference ended. The Smiths were escorted back inside the courthouse, and all across America, people watched and wept. Sheriff Howard Wells' office. October 28, 1994, Day 3. Wells is on the phone with an FBI profiler. FBI profiler. Over the phone. Sheriff, I've reviewed the case file, and I have to be honest with you. Something about this story doesn't add up all. Sheriff Wells. Go on. FBI profiler. First, carjackings almost never involve children. Most carjackers are looking for a vehicle, not hostages. Second, the location doesn't make sense. That intersection has almost no traffic at night. Why would a carjacker be waiting there? Third, the timeline is off. Susan says the guy walked up to her window, pointed a gun at her, forced her out, and drove away, all while the light was red. But that light only stays red for about 10 seconds. If there's no cross traffic, that's not enough time. Sheriff Wells. I had the same thought. FBI profiler. Sheriff, I think you need to consider the possibility that Susan Smith is lying. Sheriff Wells, sighing. I've been considering that since day one. But if I accuse her publicly and I'm wrong, this whole case falls apart. FBI profiler. Then you need to get her to confess. Because the longer this goes on, the harder it's going to be to find those boys. October 29, 1994, TAR. Day 4. Sheriff Wells brings Susan Smith back to the sheriff's office for another interview. Sheriff Wells. Susan, I need to ask you some more questions about that night. Susan Smith. Okay. Sheriff Wells. You said you were stopped at the red light at Monarch Mill Road. Is that correct? Susan Smith. Yes. Sheriff Wells. And how long were you stopped there before the man approached your window? Susan Smith. Don't know. Maybe 30 seconds? A minute? Sheriff Wells. Susan, that light doesn't stay red for 30 seconds. It turns green almost immediately if there's no cross traffic. Susan Smith. Defensive. I don't know. It felt like a long time. Sheriff Wells. Okay. Let's talk about the man. You said he was black, mid-30s. Wearing a dark knit cap. Did he say anything to you? Susan Smith. He told me to get out of the car. Sheriff Wells. Did he have an accent? Was his voice deep or high-pitched? Susan Smith. I don't remember. Sheriff Wells. Susan, you were face-to-face with this man. You must remember something about his voice. Susan Smith, starting to cry. I don't know. I was terrified. I can't remember everything. Sheriff Wells. Okay. Let's move on. After he drove away, what did you do? Susan Smith. I ran to a house nearby and called 911. Sheriff Wells. Which house? Susan Smith. Hesitating. I don't remember. There was a house with a porch light on. I knocked on the door but no one answered, so I ran back to the road and flagged down a car. Sheriff Wells. Susan, we've checked every house on that road. No one reported seeing you that night. Susan Smith, voice rising. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe they weren't home. Sheriff Wells, leaning forward. Susan, I think you're lying. Susan Smith, shocked. What? Sheriff Wells. I think you're lying. I think there was no carjacker. I think you know exactly where your boys are. Susan Smith, standing up, shouting. How dare you? My children are missing, and you're accusing me. Sheriff Wells. Sit down, Susan. Susan Smith. I'm leaving. Sheriff Wells. Susan, sit down. We're not done here. She sat back down, shaking with rage and fear. Sheriff Wells, I want you to take a polygraph test. Susan Smith. Fine. .eu. I'll take it. And when I pass, you'll see that I'm telling the truth. October 30, 1994, Tartu. Day 5, polygraph examination. F. Office, Columbia, South Carolina. Susan Smith was hooked up to a polygraph machine. Sensors were attached to her chest, fingertips, and forehead. An FBI polygrapher sat across from her, reviewing his notes. Polygrapher. Susan, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Answer yes or no. Do you understand? Susan Smith. Yes. Yet. Polygrapher. Is your name Susan Vaughn Smith? Susan Smith. Yes. Polygrapher. Do you live in Union, South Carolina? Susan Smith. Yes. Polygrapher. Did you harm your children? Susan Smith. Pause. No. The polygraph needles spike dramatically. Polygrapher. Do you know where your children are? Susan Smith. No. Dying. The needles spike again. Polygrapher. Are you withholding information about your children's disappearance? Susan Smith. No. The needles spike a third time. The test concluded. The polygrapher unhooked Susan from the machine and left the room. Sheriff Wells was waiting outside. Polygrapher. She failed. Badly. Deception indicated on every major question. Sheriff Wells. Damn it. Polygrapher. Sheriff, she's lying. And I think she knows exactly where those boys are. November 1st, 1994. Day 7. Another press conference. Susan Smith stands at the podium, this time holding a handwritten letter. Susan Smith, reading. To the person who has my children, I don't know why you took them. Maybe you're lonely. Maybe you want children of your own, but I'm asking you, begging you to let them go. Leave them at a church. A hospital, anywhere, just let them come home. I forgive you. I just want my babies back. The letter was broadcast on CNN, Good Morning America, and every local news station from Atlanta to New York. And across Union County, Sheriff Howard Wells watched the press conference with growing fury, because he knew beyond any doubt that Susan Smith was lying. Timestamp 1645. The nation searched for a black man who didn't exist, while the real killer stood in front of the cameras and cried. Sheriff Howard Wells sat in his office, staring at the case files spread across his desk. 9 days. 9 days of searching. 9 days of false leads, dead ends, and a mother who wouldn't stop lying. He picked up the phone and called FBI agent Carol Allison. Sheriff Wells. Carol, it's time. I'm bringing her in. FBI agent Allison. Are you sure you're ready? Sheriff Wells. I'm sure. We've exhausted every other option. If those boys are alive, we're running out of time. And if they're dead, then we need to know where they are. Allison. I'll be there in 20 minutes. 11:00 Susan Smith arrives at the sheriff's office. She is escorted into a small interrogation room. Sheriff Wells and FBI agent Allison sit across from her. Susan Smith. Why did you call me in again? I've already told you everything I know. Sheriff Wells. Susan, I'm going to be very direct with you. I know you're lying. Susan Smith. Defensive. I'm not lying. Sheriff Wells. Yes, you are. There was no carjacking. There was no black man. And I think you know exactly where Michael and Alex are. Susan Smith. Voice rising. I don't. I swear I don't. Sheriff Wells. Susan, you failed the polygraph. You failed it badly. Every question I asked you, you lied. Susan Smith. Polygraphs aren't accurate. Maybe I was just nervous. Sheriff Wells. Susan, listen to me. If those boys are out there somewhere cold, scared, hungry, we need to find them. Right now. But if they're not, If something happened to them, then you need to tell me. Because the longer you wait, the worse this is going to be for you. Wah. Susan Smith, sobbing. I didn't do anything. I swear. Why don't you believe me? FBI Agent Allison, leaning forward, voice soft. Susan, I'm a mother too. I have 2 boys, and I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed. I know what it's like to feel like everything is falling apart. If something happened that night, if you made a mistake, we can help you, but you have to tell us the truth. Susan Smith, shaking her head. I am telling the truth. Sheriff Wells. No, you're not. And, you know what? I think deep down, you wanted to tell us. I think you're tired of lying. I think you're tired of carrying this around. Susan Smith. There's nothing to tell. Sheriff Wells, standing up, voice loud. Enough. Susan, I am done playing games with you. Your boys are not with some carjacker. They're not in some stranger's house. They're dead. And you know exactly where they are. Now tell me the truth. Susan Smith, breaking down, sobbing uncontrollably. I can't do this anymore. Sheriff Wells. Where are they, Susan? Where are your boys? Susan Smith, barely audible. They're in the lake. Silence. Dark. Sheriff Wells, quietly. Which lake, Susan? Susan Smith, crying. John D. Long Lake. Sheriff Wells. How did they get there? Susan Smith, sobbing. I drove the car into the water. Sheriff Wells. Were they in the car when it went into the water? Susan Smith, nodding, unable to speak. Yes. Sheriff Wells turns to FBI Agent Allison. His face is pale. Sheriff Wells. Call the dive team. Now. Go. John D. Long Lake. November 3, 1994. Tardy. 11:30 p.m. Floodlights illuminate the dark water. News helicopters hover overhead. Sheriff Wells stands at the edge of the lake, staring at the water. John D. Long Lake was a small, quiet body of water about 6 miles outside of Union. It was surrounded by pine trees and accessed by a narrow dirt road. At the edge of the lake was a concrete boat ramp, angled steeply into the water. Susan Smith had confessed that this was where she had let the car roll into the lake. Divers descend into the murky water, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. At 18 feet below the surface, they see it. A burgundy Mazda Protégé, resting upside down on the lake bed. Radio transmission. We've located the vehicle, proceeding to check for occupants. The divers swam closer. They shone their lights into the windows. And there, still strapped into their car seats in the back, were Michael and Alexander Smith. Voice shaking. We have 2 victims. Both deceased. Repeat. Both victims are deceased. Radio static. Silence. Sheriff Wells stands with his hands on his knees, staring at the ground. His deputy approaches. Deputy. Sheriff? They found them. Sheriff Wells. Are they? Deputy. They're gone, sir. Both of them. Sheriff Wells closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. And then, for the first time in his 22-year career, he walked away from a crime scene and cried. The car is pulled from the lake. 2:0 a.m. November 4th, 1994. Crane operators attach chains to the vehicle and slowly lift it from the water. Water pours from the doors and windows. The car is upside down. Coroner's van. The bodies of Michael and Alexander are carefully removed from the car. They are still strapped into their car seats, still wearing their little jackets. Their faces are pale and bloated from being underwater for 9 days. Coroner to Sheriff Wells. They drowned. Both of them, probably within 6 to 10 minutes of the car going underwater. Sheriff Wells. Did they suffer? Coroner. Pause. I can't say for certain. But, yes, I think they did. November 4th, 1994. 6 0 a.m. Union County Jail. Susan Smith is formally arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. Montage. News coverage. Headlines flash across the screen. Susan Smith confesses. Mother admits drowning sons. No carjacker, she did it. Nation in shock. CNN anchor. November 4, 1994. In a stunning confession, Susan Smith has admitted to drowning her 2 sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alexander. Smith told authorities she drove her car into John D. Long Lake on October 25th, with the boys still inside. There was no carjacking. There was no black man. The entire story was a press conference. November 4th, 1994, Tartar. Union County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Wells stands at a podium, surrounded by FBI agents and prosecutors. His face is grim. Sheriff Wells. At approximately 11:15 this morning, Susan Vaughn Smith confessed to the murders of her 2 sons, Michael Daniel Smith and Alexander Tyler Smith. She stated that on the evening of October 25th, she drove her vehicle to John D. Long Lake and allowed it to roll into the water with her children still inside. The bodies of both boys were recovered late last night. They were found inside the vehicle, still strapped into their car seat. He paused, his voice breaking. Sheriff Wells, I want to make this very clear. There was no carjacking. There was no black male suspect. That story was a complete fabrication. Susan Smith lied to this community, to this state, and to this nation, and in doing so, she caused immeasurable pain to countless innocent people. A reporter shouted a question. Reporter. Sheriff. Why did she do it? Sheriff Wells. That's something only Susan Smith can answer. But I can tell you this. There is no excuse for what she did. Reverend Jesse Jackson, holding a press conference in Chicago. Do what? Reverend Jesse Jackson. Susan Smith did more than murder her children. She weaponized race. She exploited centuries of racist stereotypes about black criminality. She put every black man in Union County under suspicion. And she did it knowingly. This is not just a tragedy. This is an act of racial violence. Union, South Carolina. Protesters gather outside the Union County Jail, holding signs. Death penalty for Susan Smith. Justice for Michael and Alex. She lied. They died. David Smith, sitting in his parents' living room, staring at a photo of his sons. His mother sits beside him, holding his hand. Audition. David Smith, interview, November 5, 1994, voice hollow. I don't understand. I keep asking myself, how could she do this? How could she look at those boys, our boys, and let them drown? I trusted her. I thought she loved them. His voice cracked. He covered his face with his hands. David Smith. Michael called her Mama. He loved her, and she killed him. Susan Smith's full written confession. Sheriff's Office. November 3rd, 1994. The confession is handwritten on lined paper. Sheriff Wells reads it aloud to the camera. Sheriff Wells, reading. On Tuesday, October 25th, 1994, I was feeling very depressed and suicidal. I had been having a lot of problems in my personal life. My relationship with my boyfriend, Tom Findlay, had just ended. He told me he didn't want to be with me anymore because of my children. I felt like everything was falling apart. I drove around for a while with Michael and Alex in the back seat. I was crying. I didn't know what to do. I thought about killing myself. I thought maybe if I drove into the lake, it would all be over. I pulled into the parking area at John D. Long Lake around 8:30 p.m. I stopped the car near the boat ramp. I got out and looked at the water. I was thinking about just ending it all. But then I thought about my boys. I thought about what would happen to them if I was gone. And then I had this thought. Maybe if they weren't here, things would be easier. Maybe Tom would take me back. Maybe my life could go back to normal. I got back in the car. I put it in neutral. I released the parking brake. The car started rolling down the ramp. I got out and stood there, watching it roll into the water. I heard Michael calling for me. He was saying, "Mommy, Mommy," but I didn't get back in the car. I just stood there and watched it sink. The car went under. I could see the lights still on for a few seconds. And then it was just dark. I left. I drove to a friend's house in McEachern and called 911. I made up the story about the carjacking because I didn't want anyone to know what I had done. I thought maybe, if enough time passed, people would just assume the boys were dead and stop looking for them. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I love my boys. I will always love them. I just couldn't see any other way out. Susan Vaughn Smith. November thread, 1994. Sheriff Wells sets the paper down. He looks directly at the camera. Sheriff Wells. That's what she wrote. But here's what I know. Susan Smith didn't snap. She didn't have a momentary lapse in judgment. She made a choice. She chose to kill her children. And she chose to lie about it for 9 days while the entire nation searched for a phantom carjacker. Susan Smith said she heard Michael calling, "Mommy," but she didn't save him. She stood on the shore and watched him drown. Home video footage. Christmas morning, 1993. The Smith family living room. A small artificial Christmas tree stands in the corner, decorated with colorful lights and handmade ornaments. "Orange blowing you days, man, arms." David Smith, off camera, voice full of joy. "Michael, come here, buddy. Santa left you something." A little boy with blonde hair and bright blue eyes runs into frame, wearing dinosaur pajamas. He's 2 years old. His eyes widen when he sees the presents under the tree. Michael Smith. "Presents! Daddy, presents!" Susan Smith, off camera laughing. "Go ahead, baby. Open one." Michael tears into the wrapping paper, revealing a red fire truck. His face lights up. Michael Smith. "Fire truck. Look, Mommy, fire truck." Susan Smith. "I see it, sweetheart. Do you like it?" Michael Smith. Hugging the truck. "I love it." The camera pans to a bassinet near the couch. Inside, a tiny baby just 5 months old sleeps peacefully, wrapped in a blue blanket. His name is Alexander Tyler Smith. David Smith, whispering, "Alex is out cold. He's going to miss all the fun." Susan Smith. "Let him sleep. He was up half the night." The camera zooms in on Alexander's face. His tiny lips are pursed. His little fists are curled near his face. He looks peaceful, safe, loved. David Smith, sitting in his living room in 2024, he holds a framed copy of that same Christmas video. His eyes are red. David Smith, interview, 2024. "I watch that video sometimes. Not often. It's too painful. But when I need to remember them, I watch it, and every time I ask myself the same question. How did we get from that Christmas morning to what happened?" He sets the frame down gently. David Smith. "Michael was the happiest kid you'd ever meet. He had this smile that could just light up a room. He loved dinosaurs. He loved trucks. He loved Sesame Street, especially Big Bird. He would sit in front of the TV for hours, watching Big Bird and laughing." David picks up another photo. Michael at his 3rd birthday party, wearing a paper crown and blowing out candles on a cake, shaped like a fire truck. David Smith. This was taken just 6 months before he died. Look at his face. He's so happy. He had no idea what was coming. His voice breaks. David Smith. "Michael called me Daddy. Every morning when I picked him up for visitation, he'd run to the door and shout, 'Daddy's here!' And I'd scoop him up and swing him around. He'd laugh so hard. Laugh. Well, I can still hear it sometimes." No. Oh. Another home video. August 1993. David Smith holds a newborn baby in his arms. Susan sits beside him on a hospital bed, exhausted but smiling. Or Nurse, off camera. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. You have a healthy baby boy. David Smith, looking at the baby, voice full of wonder. Hey there, little guy. I'm your daddy. Welcome to the world, Alex. Susan Smith, smiling. He's perfect. David Smith. He looks just like you. Susan Smith. No, he has your nose. They both laugh. The baby yawns. David Smith, holding a photo of Alexander as a baby. David Smith. Alex was only 14 months old when Susan killed him. He was just learning to talk. His first word was Dada. He'd crawl around the house, pulling himself up on furniture, trying to walk. He was so determined. He'd fall down, get back up, fall down again. But he never quit. David's hands tremble as he holds the photo. David Smith. He never got to take his first real steps. He never got to say his first sentence. He never got to play with his brother the way brothers do. Because Susan took all of that from him. She took everything. Michael and Alexander's daycare. Ms. Patricia Jenkins, their daycare provider, sits in a small playroom surrounded by toys. She holds a photo of the boys. Miss Jenkins, interview 1995. I took care of Michael and Alex for almost 2 years. They were wonderful children. Michael was so sweet. He'd always help the younger kids. If someone was crying, he'd bring them a toy or a blanket. He was a little caretaker. She smiles, but her eyes are sad. Miss Jenkins. And Alex, oh, Alex was just starting to come out of his shell. He was shy at first, but once he warmed up to you, he'd give you this big, gummy smile. He loved music. I'd play nursery rhymes on the radio, and he'd bounce in his seat and clap his little hands. She sets the photo down. Ms. Jenkins. The day I found out what happened, I couldn't believe it. I kept thinking, how could Susan do that? I'd seen her pick them up from daycare. She seemed like a normal mom. She'd smile, chat with me, buckle them into their car seats. And then she killed them. Union, South Carolina. The Smith family home. David's mother, Barbara Smith, sits on the front porch looking at a scrapbook. Barbara Smith, David's mother, interview, 1995. Michael and Alex were my grandbabies. I saw them every week. We'd bake cookies together. Michael loved chocolate chip. He'd stand on a stool in the kitchen and help me stir the dough. He'd get flour all over his face. She laughs, wiping tears from her eyes. Barbara Smith. And Alex, he was just starting to say Grandma. He couldn't quite get it out, but he'd try. He'd say Gamma and reach his little arms up for me to hold him. I'd rock him to sleep in that old rocking chair in the living room. She closes the scrapbook. Barbara Smith. When Susan killed them, she didn't just kill 2 little boys, she killed our future. She killed birthdays and Christmases and graduations. She killed the men they would have become. She killed everything. November 6, 1994. Darcy. Bogensville United Methodist Church, Union, South Carolina. The funeral for Michael and Alexander Smith. The small white church was overflowing. Over 1,200 people crammed into the pews, the aisles, the vestibule. Hundreds more stood outside, unable to fit inside. The parking lot was full of news vans. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward. At the front of the church, 2 small white caskets sat side by side, covered in white roses and lilies. On each casket was a framed photo. Michael, smiling in his dinosaur t-shirt. Alexander, grinning with his 2 baby teeth. David Smith sat in the front row. Flanked by his parents and siblings, he wore a black suit. His eyes were vacant, staring at the caskets, but not really seeing them. His mother held his hand. His father had an arm around his shoulders. Behind them, Susan Smith's family sat in silence. Linda Russell, Susan's mother, wept quietly into a handkerchief. Beverly Russell, Susan's stepfather, sat stone-faced, his jaw clenched. Susan Smith was not there. She was in jail, awaiting trial. Pastor Jonathan Carey stands at the pulpit. His voice is solemn. Pastor Carey. We are gathered here today to mourn the loss of two innocent lives, Michael Daniel Smith and Alexander Tyler Smith. Two little boys who were taken from this world far too soon. We do not understand why this happened. We do not understand how a mother, the person who should protect her children above all else, could do such a thing. He pauses, looking out at the congregation. Pastor Carey. But we must remember, God is still in control. Michael and Alexander are with him now. They are safe. They are at peace. They are no longer in pain. And one day, when we join them in heaven, we will understand. The congregation sings Amazing Grace. Voices crack. People sob openly. The burial. Pine Grove Cemetery, Union, South Carolina. The two caskets are lowered into the ground side by side. David Smith stands at the edge of the grave, holding a single red rose. David Smith, whispering, "I'm so sorry, boys. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." He drops the rose onto Michael's casket. Then he drops another onto Alexander's. David Smith, "I love you. I'll always love you." He turns and walks away, his shoulders shaking with sobs. The boy's headstone. Granite with an engraving of two angels. Michael Daniel Smith. October 10th, 1991. October 25th, 1994. Alexander Tyler Smith. August 5th, 1993. October 25th, 1994. Angels watching over me. Forever in our hearts. David Smith, standing at the grave in 2024. 30 years later, he places fresh flowers on the headstone. David Smith, interview, 2024. I come here every year on their birthday. October 10th for Michael, August 5th for Alex Daughter, and October 25th, the day they died. I bring flowers. I talk to them. I tell them about my life, about their cousins, about the world they never got to see. He kneels down, tracing his fingers over their names. David Smith. Michael would be 33 years old now. He'd probably be married. Maybe have kids of his own. I think about that a lot. I think about the grandchildren I'll never have because Susan killed my boys. He stands, wiping his eyes. David Smith. And Alex, he'd be 31. I wonder what he would have looked like. What his voice would have sounded like. What his dreams would have been. But I'll never know. Because Susan took that from me. Michael's third birthday party. Home video in row. October 1994 Tartea. 2 weeks before his death. David Smith. Off camera. Make a wish, buddy. Michael leans over a cake shaped like a fire truck. 3 candles flickering. He closes his eyes, makes a wish, and blows out the candles. Everyone cheers. Michael Smith, grinning. I wished for a real fire truck. Susan Smith, off camera, laughing. Maybe Santa will bring you one. Michael Smith. Really? Susan Smith. If you're a good boy. Michael hugs her. Michael Smith. I love you, Mommy. Susan Smith. I love you too, baby. The video freezes on Susan hugging Michael died. Then it cuts to black. 2 weeks after that birthday party, Susan Smith strapped Michael into his car seat and drowned him. He never got his Christmas fire truck. July 18th, 1995, Dorda. Union County Courthouse. 9:00 a.m. Day 1 of the trial. The courthouse was packed. Every seat in the gallery was taken. News crews lined the hallways. Protesters gathered outside, holding signs demanding the death penalty. Inside courtroom 3, Susan Vaughn Smith sat at the defense table, flanked by her attorneys David Bruck and Judy Clark. She wore a conservative blue dress, her hair pulled back in a bun. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across the aisle, prosecutor Tommy Pope sat with his co-counsel, reviewing notes. Pope was a veteran prosecutor, known for his aggressive courtroom style and his passion for victims' rights. He had fought hard to secure the death penalty for Susan Smith, and he intended to win. At 9:15 a.m., Judge William Howard entered the courtroom. Bailiff. Bailiff. All rise. The Honorable Judge William Howard, presiding. Judge Howard. Please be seated. We are here today in the matter of the state of South Carolina versus Susan Vaughn Smith. The defendant is charged with 2 counts of murder in the deaths of Michael Daniel Smith and Alexander Tyler Smith. Counsel, are you ready to proceed with opening statements? Tommy Pope. The state is ready, Your Honor. David Brooke. The defense is ready, Your Honor. Judge Howard. Well, very well. Mr. Pope, you may proceed. Tommy Pope stands and walks to the jury box. He makes eye contact with each juror before speaking. Tommy Pope, opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, good morning. My name is Tommy Pope, and I represent the state of South Carolina. Over the next few weeks, you are going to hear a lot of evidence. You're going to hear testimony from law enforcement, from forensic experts, from family members. And at the end of all that testimony, you're going to be asked to make a decision. Is Susan Smith guilty of murder? He pauses, letting the question hang in the air. Tommy Pope. Now, the defense is going to tell you that Susan Smith was depressed, that she was abused, that she wasn't thinking clearly. And some of that may be true. But here's what I know. On the night of October 25, 1994, Susan Smith made a choice. She chose to drive to John D. Long Lake. She chose to put her car in neutral. She chose to release the parking brake. And she chose to stand on that shore and watch as her car with her 2 little boys strapped in the back seat rolled into the water and sank. He walks over to a large photograph mounted on an easel. Michael and Alexander, smiling. Tommy Pope. This is Michael. He was 3 years old. His favorite toy was a fire truck. His favorite TV show was Sesame Street. He called his mother Mommy. And this is Alexander. He was 14 months old. He was just learning to walk. His first word was Dada. These were not strangers. These were her sons. And she killed them. He turns back to the jury. Tommy Pope. Now, the defense is going to argue that this was some kind of accident, that Susan didn't mean for this to happen. But let me ask you something. If this was an accident, why did she lie about it? If this was an accident, why did she make up a story about a black man carjacking her? If this was an accident, why did she go on national television and beg for her children's safe return when she knew they were dead? He walks back to the prosecution table and picks up a stack of papers. Tommy Pope. I'll tell you why. Because Susan Smith is a liar. She's a manipulator. And she thought she could get away with murder. But she was wrong. And by the end of this trial, you will see that Susan Smith is guilty. Not just of killing her children, but of doing it deliberately, coldly, and without remorse. He sits down. David Brooke stands. He walks slowly to the jury box, his expression somber. David Brooke, opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Brooke, and along with my co-counsel Judy Clark, I represent Susan Smith. And I want to start by saying something that the prosecution is not going to say. Susan Smith is guilty. A murmur runs through the courtroom. David Brooke. She is guilty of killing her sons. She drove that car into the lake. She watched it sink. She lied about it. Those are the facts, and we are not going to dispute them. But this trial is not just about guilt. It's about understanding why. It's about understanding what led a 23-year-old mother to make the most horrific decision any parent can make. He walks over to a timeline poster on an easel. David Brooke. Susan Smith did not wake up on October 25, 1994, and decide to kill her children. This was not a premeditated act. This was the result of years of trauma, abuse, and untreated mental illness. He points to the timeline. David Brooke. When Susan was 7 years old, her father committed suicide. She found his body. At 15, her stepfather began sexually abusing her. That abuse continued for years. She tried to kill herself multiple times. She was hospitalized for depression. And on October 25th, 1994. She snapped. He turns back to the jury. David Brooke, I'm not asking you to excuse what Susan did. I'm not asking you to forgive her. But I am asking you to understand her. Because understanding is the first step toward justice. And justice, in this case, is not the death penalty. Justice is recognizing that Susan Smith is a broken human being who needs help, not execution. He sits down. Day 2 of the trial. Sheriff Howard Wells takes the stand. Tommy Pope. Sheriff Wells, can you please describe your interaction with the defendant on the night of October 25, 1994? Sheriff Wells, I arrived on scene at approximately 9:30 p.m. Susan Smith was standing on the side of the road, crying. She told me that a black man had carjacked her at gunpoint and driven away with her 2 sons in the back seat. Tommy Pope. And did you believe her? Sheriff Wells. At first, yes. But the more I thought about it, the less sense her story made. Tommy Pope. Can you elaborate? Sheriff Wells. The intersection where she claimed the carjacking occurred, Monarch Mill Road and Highway 49, has a traffic light that only stays red for about 10 seconds if there's no cross traffic. Susan said, the carjacker walked up to her window, pointed a gun at her, forced her out, and drove away, all while the light was red. That's not physically possible. Tommy Pope. What did you do next? Sheriff Wells. I brought her in for questioning multiple times. I asked her to take a polygraph test. She failed. And on November 3, 1994, she confessed. Tommy Pope. What did she say during that confession? Sheriff Wells. She said she drove to John D. Long Lake, put the car in neutral, released the parking brake, and watched it roll into the water with her sons inside. Tommy Pope. Did she express remorse? Sheriff Wells. Pause. She cried. But I can't say whether she was crying for her boys or for herself. David Brooke cross-examines Sheriff Wells. David Brooke. Sheriff Wells, you testified that Susan failed a polygraph test. But polygraph tests aren't admissible in court, are they? Sheriff Wells. No, they're not. David Brooke. And you also testified that Susan was crying during her confession. Does that suggest to you that she was experiencing emotional distress? Sheriff Wells. Possibly. David Brooke. Is it possible that Susan was suffering from a mental health crisis at the time she killed her children? Tommy Pope. Standing. Objection. Calls for speculation. Judge Howard. Sustained. Day 4 of the trial. Tom Findlay takes the stand. The courtroom is silent. Tom Findlay was 27 years old, clean-cut, wearing a suit. He looked uncomfortable. Tommy Pope. Mr. Findlay, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? Tom Findlay. Susan and I dated on and off for a few months in 1994. It wasn't serious, at least, not for me. Tommy Pope. Did there come a time when you decided to end that relationship? Tom Findlay. Yes. In October 1994, Charter. Tommy Pope. And how did you communicate that to Susan? Tom Findlay. I wrote her a letter. Tommy Pope. And what did that letter say? Tom Findlay, reluctantly. I told her that I wasn't ready to be in a serious relationship. And I told her that I didn't want to be a father. Tommy Pope. You told her you didn't want to be a father. And 1 week after you sent that letter, Susan Smith drowned her 2 sons. Do you believe there's a connection? Tom Findlay. I don't know. Tommy Pope. Mr. Findlay, did Susan ever tell you that her children were an obstacle to your relationship? Tom Findlay. Quietly. She said she felt like they were holding her back. Tommy Pope. Holding her back from what? Tom Findlay. From having the life she wanted. Gasps from the courtroom. Tommy Pope. No further questions. David Brooke cross-examines Tom Findlay. David Brooke. Mr. Findlay, you testified that you told Susan you didn't want to be a father. Did you know that Susan had been sexually abused by her stepfather? Tom Findlay. No, don't. David Brooke. Did you know that Susan had attempted suicide multiple times? Tom Findlay. No. No, Uzi. David Brooke. So when you broke up with her, when you told her you didn't want her children, you had no idea what kind of emotional state she was in? Tom Findlay. No, I didn't. David Brooke. No further questions. Day 6 of the trial. FBI agent Carol Allison takes the stand. Tommy Pope. Agent Allison, you were present during Susan Smith's confession, correct? FBI agent Allison. Yes. Tommy Pope. Can you describe her demeanor? FBI agent Allison. She was crying. She seemed distressed, but she was also calculating. Tommy Pope. What do you mean by calculating? FBI agent Allison. She would cry when it seemed appropriate. But when Sheriff Wells asked her specific questions about what happened, she became very calm and detailed. It was like she was switching between two different personas. Tommy Pope. Did she express remorse? FBI agent Allison. Pause. She said she was sorry, but I'm not sure she understood the full weight of what she had done. Day 8 of the trial. David Smith takes the stand. He wears a black suit. His face is pale. Tommy Pope. Mr. Smith, can you please state your relationship to the victims? David Smith. They were my sons, Michael and Alexander. Tommy Pope. Can you describe your relationship with them? David Smith, voice breaking. They were my everything. I saw them every weekend. We'd go to the park, play with trucks, watch cartoons. Michael loved dinosaurs. Alex loved music. Tommy Pope. And were you aware that Susan was planning to harm them? David Smith. No. If I had known, if I had any idea, I would have taken them and never let her near them again. Tommy Pope. No further questions. David Brooke stood but paused. David Brooke. Your Honor, the defense has no questions for this witness. David Smith stepped down, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Day 10 of the trial. Linda Russell, Susan's mother, takes the stand. David Brooke. Mrs. Russell, can you please describe Susan's childhood? Linda Russell, crying. Susan had a very difficult childhood. Her father, my first husband, committed suicide when Susan was 7 years old. She found his body in the garage. She was never the same after that. David Brooke. And what about your second husband, Beverly Russell? Linda Russell, sobbing. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. David Brooke. Didn't know what, Mrs. Russell? Linda Russell. That he was abusing Susan. Sexually. For years. I didn't find out until after she was arrested. David Brooke. And how did you find out? Linda Russell. Beverly wrote her a letter, admitting what he had done. David Brooke. Do you have that letter? Linda Russell. Yes. Yes. David Brooke. Your Honor, I'd like to enter this letter into evidence as Defense Exhibit 14. Judge Howard. So ordered. Judy Clark reads Beverly Russell's letter aloud in court. Judy Clark, reading. Dear Susan, I am writing this letter to tell you how deeply sorry I am for the things I did to you. I know that what I did was wrong. I took advantage of you when you were young and vulnerable. I abused your trust. I hurt you in ways that can never be undone. I have asked God for forgiveness, and now I am asking you for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I am asking anyway. I love you, Susan, and I am so sorry. Beverly. No, I. Silence. The jury stares at the letter. Day 12 of the trial. Dr. Seymour Halleck, a psychiatrist, testifies for the defense. Judy Clark. Dr. Halleck, you've examined Susan Smith, correct? Dr. Halleck. Yes. Judy Clark. And what is your professional diagnosis? Dr. Halleck. Susan suffers from severe depression, dependent personality disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder, stemming from childhood sexual abuse. Judy Clark. In your professional opinion, was Susan in her right mind on October 25, 1994? Dr. Halleck. No. I believe Susan was experiencing a severe depressive episode, possibly with suicidal ideation. She was not thinking clearly. Judy Clark. Do you believe Susan intended to kill her children? Dr. Halleck. I believe Susan intended to kill herself. And in her disordered state of mind, she believed that taking her children with her was the only way to protect them from a life without her. Tommy Pope cross-examines Dr. Halleck. Tommy Pope. Dr. Halleck, you testified that Susan was suicidal. But she didn't kill herself, did she? Dr. Halleck. No. Tommy Pope. She killed her children, and then she got out of the car and walked away. Does that sound like someone who wanted to die? Dr. Halleck. Mental illness is complicated. Susan may have changed her mind at the last moment. Tommy Pope. Or maybe she never intended to die. Maybe she just wanted her children out of the way so she could live her life. Isn't that possible? Dr. Halleck. It's possible. Tommy Pope. No further questions. Cut 2. Day 14 of the trial. Closing arguments. Tommy Pope stands before the jury. Tommy Pope. Closing argument. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 2 weeks, you've heard a lot of testimony. You've heard about Susan Smith's difficult childhood. You've heard about her depression. You've heard about the abuse she suffered. And I don't dispute any of that. Susan Smith had a hard life. But you know what? A lot of people have hard lives. A lot of people suffer abuse. A lot of people struggle with depression. And they don't kill their children. No. Martaden Arsenal. He walks over to the photos of Michael and Alexander. Tommy Pope. The defense wants you to believe that Susan Smith is a victim. But she's not. Michael and Alexander are the victims. They're the ones who didn't get a choice. They're the ones who drowned in that car, calling for their mother, while she stood on the shore and watched. He turns back to the jury. Tommy Pope. Susan Smith is guilty. Not just of murder, but of the most cold-blooded, calculated act of evil you can imagine. And I am asking you to hold her accountable. Find her guilty. On both counts. Thank you. David Brooke delivers the defense's closing argument. David Brooke. Ladies and gentlemen, Susan Smith is guilty. We've never denied that. But the question before you is not whether Susan is guilty. The question is why. And the answer to that question matters. Because if we don't understand why Susan did what she did, then we can't prevent it from happening again. He walks over to Susan, who is crying quietly at the defense table. David Brooke. Susan Smith is not a monster. She's a broken human being. A woman who was failed by her family, by her stepfather, by the mental health system. And on October 25th, 1994, she broke completely. And in that moment of brokenness, she made the worst decision any parent can make. He turns back to the jury. David Brooke, I'm not asking you to excuse what Susan did. I'm asking you to understand it. Because understanding is the first step toward justice. And justice, in this case, is recognizing that Susan Smith is guilty, but also human. Thank you. July 22nd, 1995, .org. Jury deliberation. 12:00 p.m. The jury files out of the courtroom. 2.5 hours pass. The jury returns at 2:30 p.m. Judge Howard. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? Foreperson. We have, Your Honor. Judge Howard. On the charge of murder in the death of Michael Daniel Smith, how do you find the defendant? Foreperson. Guilty. Judge Howard. On the charge of murder in the death of Alexander Tyler Smith, how do you find the defendant? Foreperson. Guilty. Susan Smith collapses into her chair, sobbing. David Smith, sitting in the gallery, closes his eyes and bows his head. Mic drop moment #5, timestamp, 06030. The jury took 2.5 hours to convict Susan Smith. It took 6 minutes for her sons to drown. She had time to save them. She chose not to. July 28, 1995. All. Union County Courthouse. Sentencing phase begin. After the guilty verdict, the trial moved into the penalty phase. The question was no longer whether Susan Smith was guilty, but whether she deserved to die. Under South Carolina law, the death penalty could only be imposed if the jury found aggravating circumstances that outweighed any mitigating circumstances. The prosecution argued that Susan Smith's crimes were especially heinous and depraved. The defense argued that her traumatic childhood and mental illness should spare her from execution. Tommy Pope delivers his penalty phase argument. Tommy Pope. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today to ask for the ultimate penalty, death. And I don't make that request lightly. But in this case, there is no other appropriate punishment. He walks to the jury box. Tommy Pope. Susan Smith didn't kill her children in a moment of rage. She didn't kill them in self-defense. She planned it. She drove to that lake. She put the car in neutral. She released the parking brake. And she stood on that shore and watched as her sons drowned. That is not a crime of passion. That is cold-blooded murder. He picks up a photo of Michael and Alexander. Tommy Pope. These boys were innocent. They were helpless. They trusted their mother, and she killed them. If this case doesn't deserve the death penalty, then no case does. Judy Clark delivers the defense's penalty phase argument. Judy Clark. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not going to stand here and tell you that Susan Smith doesn't deserve to be punished. She does. She killed her children. That is a fact. But I am asking you to spare her life. Not because she deserves it, but because killing her will not bring Michael and Alexander back. It will only add another death to this tragedy. She walks over to Susan, who is crying. Judy Clark. Susan Smith is guilty, but she is also a victim. She was sexually abused by her stepfather. She was abandoned by her father. She suffered from severe depression and suicidal ideation. And on October 25, 1994, she snapped. She turns back to the jury. Judy Clark. I am asking you to show mercy, not for Susan's sake, but for your own, because mercy is what separates us from the very evil we're trying to punish. Thank you. David Smith delivers a victim impact statement during the penalty phase. David Smith. I want the death penalty. I want Susan to feel what my boys felt. I want her to know what it's like to be helpless, to be scared, to call out for help and have no one answer. But that's not going to happen, because no matter what sentence you give her, it will never be enough. It will never bring my boys back. He pauses, his voice breaking. David Smith. So I'm asking you to give her the harshest penalty you can, because she doesn't deserve mercy. She doesn't deserve another chance. She gave up that right when she watched my boys drown. July 28, 1995. All. 4:00 p.m. The jury deliberates on the sentence. 2.5 hours pass. The jury returns at 6:30 p.m. Judge Howard. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a sentencing recommendation? Foreperson. We have, Your Honor. Judge Howard. What is the jury's recommendation? Foreperson. We recommend life in prison, without the possibility of parole for 30 years. Gasps from the courtroom. David Smith buries his face in his hands. Susan Smith collapses, sobbing with relief. Outside the courthouse, David Smith speaks to reporters. David Smith. I wanted the death penalty. I wanted Susan to pay the ultimate price for what she did. But the jury made their decision, and I have to respect that. But let me be clear. Life in prison is not enough. 30 years is not enough. My boys got a death sentence. Susan Smith got to live. Union County Jail. Susan Smith is processed and transported to the South Carolina Women's Correctional Facility in Columbia. Narrator. On July 28, 1995, Susan Vaughn Smith was sentenced to life in prison. Under South Carolina law, at the time, life sentences with parole eligibility required a minimum of 30 years served. That meant Susan Smith would be eligible for parole on November 4, 2024, exactly 30 years after she confessed to murdering her sons. The jury gave Susan Smith mercy, but she never gave her sons a chance to beg for theirs. For 30 years, Susan Smith lived behind bars. She was inmate number 68,549. She worked in the prison laundry. She attended Bible study. She wrote letters to pen pals. She painted. She sold her artwork online, sparking controversy and outrage. And she waited for this day, November 20th, 2024, her first parole hearing. During her incarceration, Susan Smith was disciplined multiple times. In 2000, she was caught having a sexual relationship with a prison guard. In 2001, another guard was fired for inappropriate contact with her. In 2015, she was disciplined for using her phone privileges to contact a documentary filmmaker about profiting from her story. In 2023, she was found with contraband, a cell phone, and marijuana. I've been dreading this day for years. I knew it was coming. But that doesn't make it any easier. Every 2 years from now on, I'll have to come back and relive this nightmare. I'll have to stand in front of that board and beg them not to let her out for the rest of my life. Smith, you okay? I thought maybe they'd give me a chance. Prison guard. You'll get another hearing in 2 years. I'll be 55 years old. Better than being dead. Mr. Smith, how do you feel about the board's decision? Relieved. But I know this isn't over. In 2 years, we'll be back here. And in 2 years after that. And I'll keep coming back until I can't anymore. Because my boys can't speak for themselves, so I have to speak for them. Do you think Susan Smith has changed? I don't care if she's changed. I care that my boys are dead, and nothing she does will ever change that. The parole board's decision to deny Susan Smith's release has been met with widespread approval. A poll conducted by our network shows that 87% of Americans believe she should never be released. Twitter user: Susan Smith deserves to rot in prison for the rest of her life. She killed her babies. I believe in rehabilitation, but some crimes are unforgivable. This is one of them. Susan Smith asked for a second chance. The parole board remembered that her sons never got one. 30 years have passed since Susan Smith drowned Michael and Alexander in this lake. 30 years of trials, appeals, parole hearings, and public outrage. But some questions remain unanswered. Why did Susan Smith do it? The prosecution said it was because of Tom Finley, because she wanted a life without the burden of motherhood. The defense said it was trauma, because she was a broken woman who snapped. But the truth is more complicated. Susan Smith didn't kill her children in a moment of rage. She drove to that lake. She put the car in neutral. She released the brake. She stood on the shore and watched. She heard Michael calling for her. And she did nothing. That wasn't a snap decision. That was a choice. People ask me if I think Susan has changed. If I think she's truly sorry. And honestly, I don't know. But I think she's sorry she got caught. I think she's sorry her life didn't turn out the way she wanted. But do I think she's sorry she killed her kids? I'm not convinced. I come here every year. I bring flowers. I talk to them. I tell them I love them. And I tell them that I'm still fighting for them. I'll never stop. The Susan Smith case is a reminder of the darkest corners of human nature. It's a reminder that evil doesn't always look like a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes it looks like a mother with tears in her eyes. It's a reminder that lies have consequences, not just for the liar, but for entire communities. And it's a reminder that justice is not just about punishment. It's about remembering the victims. Michael Daniel Smith. Darrell. October 10th, 1991. October 25th, 1994. Alexander Tyler Smith. August 5th, 1993. October 25, 1994. They were sons, brothers, children who deserve to grow up, and they will never be forgotten. Susan Smith will be eligible for parole again in 2026. David Smith will be there, because justice never sleeps and neither does a father's love.